Taking drugs to make music to take drugs to. This seems to be a phrase that people have taken to heart regarding Spaceman 3. It is fairly shocking, I suppose, and it certainly was at that point in the 80s when the overwhelming message being beamed at us loud and clear from every billboard and public information broadcast was, just say no. Just say no. It had been billed as an evening of contemporary sitar music, which was perhaps slightly misleading in that none of us had ever seriously played a sitar, nor had we brought one with us. Ideally, Sonic would have brought along his saz, which is a Turkish instrument that reverberates pleasingly around drones and which can occasionally produce Eastern sounding scales. Unfortunately, that particular instrument had been stolen from him by some music killer who shall remain unnamed. When we arrived at Brentford Arts Centre, we were pleased to look out through the generous windows that ran along one side of the reception room. These windows looked out onto the River Thames and Kew Gardens beyond the far bank. Bobbing merrily on the river were ducks, happy ducks. I've played a few shows in my time, but at no point recall another stage that provided a view including a picturesque river and complimentary ducks. We set up our amps in a small semicircle in the middle of the room facing the docks. After a quick line check to make sure we were all making the correct noises, we retired to smoke hash. As we stoned ourselves into a one-note state of mind. Some of our state of mind might have leaked out, and perhaps that was the start of the problem. An art centre is no place for mind-altering substances, or at least this one wasn't. We considered marijuana like other people considered coffee. We fake apologised for the smell and continued as we were. Spaceman 3 was certainly not something you might expect to encounter at a serious-minded art centre in the late 80s. Bands didn't really play at art centres anyway, or at least we didn't. Just play one note, Sonic had advised me and Steve Evans, who had joined us for this one-off show. Keep it simple, one note, no fancy stuff. By fancy stuff, he meant two notes. Anything beyond that was pointless. We could play one note mostly, anyone could do it, a monkey could do it, but could a stoned monkey do it with feeling and without losing its sense of identity in the glorious all-enveloping Om? Only time would tell, and as time was going to be behaving strangely again, we would probably have to wait until later. We tuned the guitars and plugged into our amps. Sonic played the first chord of the performance on his Vox Starstreamer using the built-in repeater and a heavy tremolo so that the sound might be pleasing to people who liked that sort of thing. The guitar pulsed out a regular rhythm all on its own that phased and gelled with itself as he turned the dial on the tremolo. Wah, 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 as the drone started to congeal into itself and become more than it should. I moved my plectrum around between my thumb and index finger and went for the most inconspicuous E I could find on the fretboard. Nothing too low and nothing too high. I wasn't going to be faffing around, sliding between octaves and running around the neck, so I started as I meant to go on and on and on and on. I locked into Steve's inconspicuous E within the blurring tempo and tried my best to find the natural mean between the inconsistencies. It sounded fine. I wasn't standing out or ruining the drone. In fact, I was so in time and tune that I could barely hear myself. I kept myself in line with the tempo by using the feel and the audible click of the plectrum on the strings of my electric bass. Tick, 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 tick. Wah, 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 wah. It melded perfectly into a seamless whole, and the grand pulsating amoeba settled into its centre. It said, turning time into atomic uncertainty and mystical probability as all focus settled upon the one, which was the two, and the three, and the four, in the what. The many became one. The one became the many, and all we had to do was hold it together and let it do the work as the repetition made nonsense of what we thought we knew. We were there, we had some nice guitars. Did I mention we were getting paid and that we didn't have a sitar? Perhaps none of it mattered. We were playing in an art centre after all. Fuck it, it sounds nice and that's the main thing. The tone is pleasant, and now that the band is playing all together, we are almost loud enough to drown out those two people talking loudly over in the far corner of the bar about how shit we are. I wonder what the docs think, floating blissfully upon the Ganges as they are. How does it feel to be a dock upon the Ganges in London? The guitars fade back into themselves and the room and everything else seems to be ending too. Perhaps the song is finishing. Do you know how long you've been playing? Then the actual voice of God appears. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please take your seats for this evening's showing of Wings of Desire? What? We're already sitting down. What does God even mean by that? How could so little mean so much? After 44 minutes and 17 seconds of this sort of thing, our perpetual motion machine begins its descent back to what we will laughingly refer to as reality. The music ends, and a smattering of applause greets the relief and disappointment of relative silence. I looked up from my bass and tried to come to terms with not doing the thing I'd been doing for nearly 50 minutes. I shook the blood back into my rigid and aching left hand, and I flexed the claw of my pick hand. I checked that the other musicians were finished, and then reached down to switch off my amplifier. I was quite surprised to find that it was impossible to switch it off. It was impossible to switch it off because I had never switched it on in the first place. This was quite confusing and embarrassing until I realised that nobody, not even me, who had been sitting on my amplifier, had actually noticed that it wasn't switched on. A monkey could have done what I had just done. The ducks outside could have done it. I stood up, leaving my bass guitar ready for the next set. The management said that our services will not be required, but they are going to pay us for both sets. This seemed like a minor triumph on more than one level. When we had stopped laughing, we went back out into the art centre foyer, packed up our equipment and went home. The live recording of that performance continues to sell 27 years later. To this day, I'm not sure if it was art or not.